everybody knows, they've come here this evening to listen to a talk about, why we need a spiritual revolution. And as you know, I don't like to use the word need, but in this instance, I feel that is needed in the world. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to share my screen with all of you and then take you through the presentation. And I look forward to your questions or comments at the end. And whilst I'd love to take responsibility for this work myself, I want to share with the audience that this is a download. This is stuff that comes to me from universal wisdom to share with the world. And I'm just honored that I have this responsibility to package it and share it with, a lot of you might know the material, but in a slightly different format. And this is the way I will be sharing it tonight. So what I'm going to do is share my screen with you and then take you through what we will be talking about tonight. So let me just put this into presentation format. So we are going to be talking tonight about the courageous path of a spiritual revolutionary. And I'll be taking you through a little bit of understanding of what that means in case you don't know the difference between a spiritual warrior and a spiritual revolutionary. But once again, thanks to Moyo Talks for having me at this event. So if you've read my book or if you know any of my work, the call to action that's been given to me is to share with the world that there are only two ways to be in life, and that is to be love or not. If you don't understand what that means, that's okay. By the end of this presentation, you'll have a full grasp of what that means. So I look forward to taking you through this process. So tonight's conversation, what I'm going to be covering, just to give you a little bit of insight, is what has happened over time with spiritual teachers and their teachings, and mankind's interference with universal wisdom. Why integration of individual spirit is so important to our ways of being, and our ways of being in terms of how we pitch up in the world in body, mind, and soul. And when we connect with spirit and integrate from that space, it automatically opens us and our access to universal spirit or universal wisdom, whichever is your preference in terms of choice, or God, love, as I call it. I'll be talking about the path from spiritual warrior to spiritual revolutionary, and then what this all means for you, for me, the world right now, and for us in the future. I always like to share first why this conversation is so important. I think it's always been important, but where we are right now, we know that mankind, as clever as he is, has managed to extend life expectancy from 32 to 73 years. That's almost double in approximately 120 years only, in such a short period of time in terms of the existence of, us as human beings. And yet, sadly, we are more untethered than ever. And we've got mental health issues and at an all-time high, and chemical medication at an all-time high. And what's happened and, what's been shared with me that I'll be sharing with you tonight is that we have become devoted to an unhealthy ego narrative. I don't like to talk about the ego as non-existing. I like to talk about it. And when I say I, this is, bigger than me, where the ego is either unhealthy or healthy. But when the ego is unhealthy as it is, we are very bound in a body, mind, and soul narrative. And as a result of this, we continue to miss the obvious signs that are being sent to us to integrate individually and as mankind and heal. And specifically, a big one for me is the conversation of COVID and what it came here to gift us and teach us and open us up to. So beyond universal spirit, some people say to me, but what do you mean, Jacqui, when you talk about body, mind, soul, and spirit? I'm sure most people that come to Moyo Talks or involved in the School of Intuition will get that instantly. But some people refer to themselves as body, mind, and soul, or body, mind, and spirit. So if you don't understand the difference, I will be talking a little bit about that as well tonight. But even if we do understand it, one of the most important questions that we should be asking ourselves, are we nurturing each part of these four components of self in equal proportion? We've grown up in a time where we're so educated to the academics of the mind. So be good academically and you'll succeed, or be good on the sports field and become, not that I'm knocking, I wish I was a professional sports person, but we're not looking at each of our parts individually because of our education system mostly is towards body and mind. And whilst a little bit of soul work has been done, since the time of, certainly the time that I've grown up, we've seen so many people leave their churches or an environment to connect with spirit. So first, what I'm going to share is how did meeting and integrating my spirit serve me? Well, it actually goes back a long way of we all born with this pure essence of spirit in body, and then we take on these narratives, whether they be our parental narratives or our societal narrative, and then we take on beliefs. And what was interesting for me is, and I run workshops on manifesting miracles. So what was interesting for me was I was born into an environment where I believe miracles were possible because my mother shared with me from a very young and tender age that she had experienced a miracle. At the age of 18 or 19, she was at university studying art at Michaelis, and she fell down 2 flights of stairs and broke her back. And, at first they thought, she would never walk again. And she was in hospital, I think, for 3 months, and her remedial work, took a lot longer than that. I think about a 9-month period. And eventually, even with this big screw in her back, she was not only able to walk, but one of the things that they said to her is she'd never be able to have children. And well, here I am, and I have 4 brothers. So, she shares with how she was in church one day, and my mother was a very devoted Christian, but more than that, she was really such an incredible spiritual woman and one of my greatest teachers when I got to really understand her. But she was in a church and she prayed for a miracle. And so she, believes, and that's the important thing, is the belief system that miracles were possible, as she had experienced one and was able to carry and give birth to 5 children, and was always very active, windsurfing and doing all sorts of things. And for those of you like you, Mark, who have read my memoir, Life's Not Yoga, this is the new cover, I hope you can see it. I don't want to give it away, but I had experienced this physical miracle at 16 because I believed it was possible. And I had this back problem, which I told was going to be with me for life. And I took it to prayer in a church. And at the time, I believed it was something else. Shortly after that, I fell into significant depression and tried to take my life and went through some very difficult stages. And I tripped over myself over and over again. And my ego started getting in the way of my life. And Mark, you interviewed me about that in terms of how my ego got in the way. And I'll share a little bit of what that means just now. But I lost connection with spirit, the part of me that was able to manifest a miracle. And in my early 40s, in severe depression, I started to question again, how was it possible that I had this miracle? How was it possible that my mother had this? And, and feeling at that stage, very strongly about rejecting any form of organized religion. This was very difficult for me, and hence how in surrendering 100% and losing everything, I share how, at a moment in the mountain up in Colorado, hiking in the snow, when universal wisdom started speaking to me, but it was in the moment of total surrender. And since then, by that stage, I was suffering from chronic fibromyalgia, from debilitating migraines, seizures, and all sorts of other illnesses as a result of not being able to heal. And I'm very grateful to say that I've not only been able to heal from these things, but when they push through again, when my ego gets in the way, I'm able to go back, reconnect, but remind myself that I have to work on all 4 elements of self, that is spirit, body, mind, and soul, and how I can manifest miracles again. So it's the trigger story that keeps us unconscious. Most of you will know that who do this work, but I'm just going to take you through a couple of thoughts. So we know that Viktor Frankl said, and many other, wise people have said, that between stimulus and response, there is a space. And in that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our freedom and our growth. And what I feel sort of adding to this, what was such an awakening for me, was realizing from what part of my being was I choosing to respond. And we often don't realize that it's not always just a mind response or a soul response or a body response. It could be 3 at one go, or it could be one of them. But when we work on all 4, we start to see that. And for me specifically, it was about my ego tripping me up. And the question we can then ask is, how might your ego be tripping you up? I'm sorry, I'm very thirsty tonight. Give me a second. So the question once again, it's fed through me to pose is, how does one access the courage to look in the mirror, examine the nature and structure of a belief that drives the story? Because always underneath the trigger is the story, or above the trigger is the story that brings the trigger. But underlying that is our belief system. And how do we really change those belief systems or examine those belief systems in order to change our thoughts, words, and deeds? We hear about everybody say, have positive thoughts, do kind things. This is bigger than kindness. This is bigger than trying to force a change system onto yourself. And trying to change our thoughts when we can't actually question the belief, it's actually not possible. When we can actually examine the belief and shift it, then we have this incredible ability to manifest miracles and change our thoughts, words, and deeds. So this is what I talk about when I talk about herein lies the growth from spiritual warrior to spiritual revolutionary. And it's when we have the capacity to go so deep that we're not just following someone else's teachings as a warrior, someone who goes to war. When we are very aware of some of the wars that are going on in the world at the moment, are just following their leader and not necessarily having the courage to think about what it is that they are truly doing. When we have the heart of revolutionary, we are incapable of acting in any other way but love. So this is was quite a key moment for me. So 10 years ago, I was at a conference in New York, and I thought, okay, it was a publishing conference. I've got it. I've figured it all out. I know what I'm doing. I am fully enlightened. I don't really mean that, but I really felt that I'd come to an understanding of what was, the end for me. But I go to this conference in New York, and it's a Hay House conference. And we know that they are one of the biggest publishers of, any books in this genre. And I'm sitting at the conference and I'm so excited because I'm going to write this book and I'm going to change the world. That's how I feel at that moment in time. And I'm sitting over there and the conference starts, and as Tracy Reed and Cheryl Richardson are busy talking on stage. And I mean, these are gurus. They're talking, and there's this woman sitting next to me who's nudging me the whole time and passing comments about what she agrees with them and what she doesn't. And I'm getting so annoyed. And she keeps going, oh, no, I don't agree with that. Oh, can you believe they're saying that? And all this negative narrative that's going on. And I think I've got to sneak out and go to the toilet, and I've got to find another seat. So I leave and I come back and I go sit in another seat. Well, the next woman sitting next to me, she's going, sort of very evangelical, going, hallelujah. Oh, I love that. And I'm just like, be quiet, woman. I mean, just stop it. And I think I'm going to go crazy. Why am I attracting all of these people? I want to listen to Tracy Reed and Cheryl Richardson. I don't want to listen to the people that are in the audience. There must have been about 900 of us. Anyway, so after the tea break, I decide I'm going to get myself another seat because I got to get away from this woman. Anyway, so I get to another seat and I'm sitting over there. And what happens is this woman starts writing notes to me of where she's agreeing or disagreeing and passing the notes over to me to read them. And of course, I'm reading them when I should have just ignored her. And I'm thinking, what is wrong with me that I'm attracting these people? And then I realized what they were actually doing was reflecting the thinking that I was having at an undercurrent, as I was caught up in my ego that, I was going to, accomplish something that, no disrespect, but I don't think any spiritual teachers ever affected anybody, even if they've been heard about. And I was so humbled in that moment. And I knew that that was actually the beginning of my journey. And hence it's taken me 10 years to bring some of the stuff that was given to me in those mountains in Colorado out into the public domain. And part of that was dealing with myself in terms of, wanting and feeling that I had this calling to be a light worker, and my ego, what were people going to say? And I remember a talk that you did recently with a group, and you shared some of your journey about that, Mark, in terms of how your friends responded. And so eventually I brought my memoir, and now I've been running some workshops in person, and now they're going to be going online as well. So what actually happened to mankind that they became so untethered? And I'm going to share this as through the lenses of what has happened over time with spiritual teachers and teachings, and mankind's interference with universal wisdom. And I'm going to go, on this, you can see at the bottom here, I've got, 6,000 century BCE all the way to 2020, and we'll come right to this year in terms of looking at that. And I'm going to do it over time because these are people we know, we respect, we admire through spiritual teachers that have labored, toiled, sacrificed, or exerted themselves for a higher purpose. And be it via mystical teachings, philosophical, theological, or psychological teachings and or other practices. Because at the heart of it, they all come to the same thing. But we're not necessarily teaching and sharing it from the same perspective. And that's what's been very humbling for me, is understanding that. So going back to 6th century BCE, we all know Buddha's work. And, I want to start with him because he's a known from that time. Going up until Socrates in terms of a philosophical approach, in terms of how he shared his message. And then Jesus at, BCE, CE, and Muhammad shortly after that, and the teachings that they shared with us, which all come from the same source, but just through a different voice as a human being. And then to Carl Jung, and I particularly like Jung and the way that he speaks about universal understanding. But what has happened? So when we go through, and this is just a general thing, is from the mystics to when the voice of the philosophies became very strong and written about, to the theologies, to the psychologies, and to today, the question mark. And why this is a bouncing light is actually what these people, all of these people were telling us, that we can all do this. We can all actually be this enlightened. But the world is moving so fast, and we don't have 40 years to sit on the mountain. But are we actually being enough of a student in our process when we teach and when we bring the message forth? So that's the question that's been posed to me. And once again, this that was gifted to me is what happened, because I'm talking about body, mind, soul, and spirit. We became over-identified. We over-identified with the personalities of these teachers, and we made them the heroes. We know Jesus said, bow before no man. And in that message, he was talking to us to not bow to him either. It's about serving universal wisdom, God, love, or whatever word you want to refer to. And when you really go to the root of all those teachings, they're the same. But it took over 7,000 years, probably 20,000 years, for where mankind has become over-identified with the personality of an individual. From there, from about the 1600, the Common Era onwards to Jung, was at the time of the Industrial Revolution, where man was becoming very clever in terms of the way that he did things, in terms of mechanization. And so it took approximately 400 years where it became all about mankind and his intelligence and an over-identification with the mind. And we then had a bit of a mind crisis. What has happened in less than 100 years, where, as I was saying, in approximately 120 years, mankind has managed to, take life expectancy from 32 years to about 73 years, is we have a body, we over-identify in body, where this aspect of how we look and what we're supposed to look like is become so important, and we've over-identified in the physical. And, people, we'll even cut ourselves up. We'll do incredible things to our body to look younger, to look better, because we feel it's so important. But what has happened is in 2016, what was sent to me, which I shared in my workshops, is that we're heading for a spiritual crisis, and it was going to happen fast. It wasn't going to be another 100 years, because you can just see the curve in terms of what was given to me and a trajectory to say, what do we need to do as a human race? What is it that's actually at the root of this? And so we were heading for a spiritual crisis. And then in less than 4 years, 2020, COVID hit us. And why this could have been a spiritual awakening for all of mankind is the universe, God was bringing us a single message, a single conversation where we could all talk about the same thing and use it as a way to unite and connect and heal together. And sadly, what has happened, we have seen man become more fractured, and we see exactly what's happening in Russia at the moment, which is very tragic, as man is fighting with this over-identification of what is important, wanting more land, wanting more material goods, as opposed to what about more from a spiritual point of view? What more can we do to be more integrated? But it's the gift for us. So we've arrived at this untethered, segregated space and time, as we, myself included, are consumed with judging, comparing, and telling others what to think, say, and do. We lack the ability to access true courage. And in true courage, it's the nature of deep curiosity to look within. It's not just looking at my triggers, because I even see myself doing it and I justify a story, as opposed to going beyond and going deeper. And then examining the belief and seeing if the beliefs are filled with love, or are they exclusion, dogma, or judgment. And it's too easy to get involved in exclusion or say, well, we are this group doing this, so look at us, we're so good. So this is really work about going even deeper beyond kindness or being good. So beliefs that are infused with love allow us to access the power within to bring peace and healing to ourselves first, and thereby the world. Beliefs lacking in love result in a fear-based shame, guilt, or blame narrative. So we all know Gandhi said we must be the change we wish to see. And it's in that word be. And it's in the word of being love, being at one with universal wisdom, being at one with the universe, being at one with God is the message of what comes through. But how do we be the change? To be the change is actually not so easy, because we are all so busy these days, and it's not about, being anti-women's right, but with women working, the household has changed so drastically in terms of who are educating and nurturing our children. And yet Mother Earth, and as I refer, cosmic energy being Father Sky, are actually there to support us. So with all of this change and all of the things that we are driving, forward in terms of change, in terms of how the family unit has changed, it's still possible if we take some time out and actually be the change ourselves. So the path from spiritual warrior to spiritual revolutionary, that's really what we're talking about tonight. I love to share the story about the wise old man outside the city. So there was this ancient city with high walls, and there was a wise old sage standing outside the city. And along came a young man, and he said to the old man, I've left my town, my people, my family, and I'm coming to the big city to make this incredible success of my life. Please tell me, what can I find when I get to the other side? What's going to happen when I get to the other side? What can I expect? And the sage said, young man, what did you have at home? What did you have in the town that you left? He said, well, I had this amazing family. I had people who loved me. There was community, there was sharing, and there was support. And the sage said, well, young man, when you go inside that wall, you are going to find people that are loving, supportive, family-orientated, kind and caring. And off the young man went. And on the same day, a while later, another young man came along, and he said to the sage, wise man, please tell me, what am I going to find on the other side of the wall? And the sage said to him, because he shared his story as well, that he'd left his town. He said, what happened in your town? What was it like there? He said, no, everyone was cruel and unkind and egotistical and, not very supportive. And so he carried on with his negative narrative. And the wise old man said, well, when you get to the other side of the wall, you're going to find unkind, unsupportive people. And that is really, once again, going to the root of the belief in terms of what we're going to find, what we can manifest, what we can change, what will be our reality. So I want to just share with you how our tightly held beliefs limit our access to spirit and control our ways of being. And I even refer to when we would say we're being good or kind, and why going deeper than kindness is impossible, is so possible. So a story I love to share as well is, where have all the taxis gone? And for those of you, which I think most of the audience are from South Africa, is I believe that right now, and I shouldn't say that actually I believe, but certainly a belief for me at one time and my community was this negative narrative around commuter taxis in South Africa. And one day I'm driving along, this is about 6 years ago, And I'm so triggered by a taxi that pulls out in front of me. And I start with this whole inner dialogue. And of course, I bring all of that negative energy into the car. Of course, I want to shout out and I want to push him off the road and be tough, you know. And I just sort of look at myself and I think, whoa, Jacqui, you know, you do this work, you've come to this understanding. Why are you allowing this negative energy into your space? So I said to myself, okay, well, examine your beliefs. So if we're going to start at the root of the belief to change the word, thought, or deed, what is actually going on with your belief? And when I unpacked my belief, I realized that for myself, I believed all taxi drivers didn't have a legal license. I believed all the cars were not roadworthy. And so the negative narrative continued. And I realized, wow, this is like quite hectic, Jacqui. And I thought, well, let me change the belief, because what's happening is my words, thoughts, and deeds, there's nothing positive here. So I started working with saying, well, let's believe that every taxi driver has a legitimate license, and let's believe that every taxi is roadworthy. And more importantly, this man has the responsibility, the same as a pilot who flies a plane, for all these souls, to bring them to work, to commute to and from their daily commitments. And I started putting that out there, and I was feeling so good about myself because I wasn't being triggered. But the important thing, when Frankl talks about that space, I started to create space between myself and the taxis. The space is where love, God, lies. And that's in the aspect of being love, is I created the space between myself and the taxis. And I saw them, I would slow down and wave them forward and make sure that I was always giving them enough space on the road whilst they were doing their work. Anyway, it didn't take long. Before I was thinking, I'm so good. And really, I looked at myself and I thought, seriously, Jacqui, this is not how it's meant to be. I mean, you're going into the ego narrative again. And I'm going to talk about, the egotist and false humility. So now I've gone from, the bully of I'm so important, I can take your land kind of narrative to, I can own the road, to look at me, I'm so good, look what I'm doing. And I was like, oh, anyway, I decided not to engage with shame. And I looked at it again. I thought, Jacqui, just surrender to this belief. Pull this belief in and manifest the miracle. And the taxis disappeared. I didn't see the taxis anymore. They were gone. Anyway, this is not the end of the story. I'm going to share the end of the story with you shortly. I just want to go through one or two more slides because my ego pitched up again. And so what does this all mean for us? And how does a connection with your spirit change anything? And that's going to continue in the story about the taxis. So integration in its opening to universal wisdom is when we integrate and we work in equal parts with body, mind, soul, and spirit. And, certainly, there was a time in my life where, being academically smart was so important, or being physically fit was so important. And now I try to spend an equal amount of time every day on all four components of self. Not always successful, but I give it a shot. And this is where we explode from the trigger. So when we see an attack, we have the capacity to view what's going on, to view the situation differently, and be love. And this is the work that I unpack in my Meet Your Spirit workshop as to how you can actually do that. I just need to move this quickly. So when operating from spirit, we can be love and behave differently, as opposed to this judgment in terms of, what we believe is wrong, and be the change internally. And this is where I talk about integration, and we work in all parts in equal proportion. So the question for all of us is, how much time do we spend on each part of our being? Our body, our mind, our soul, and our spirit. And where does one even begin? Particularly if yes, therapy is a fantastic way to do soul work, but spiritual work is something I think is still, in many ways, we're trying to discover what it means separate from soul. And why I've developed this workshop, to help people, understand for themselves which part of themselves they need the growth for, and then how to integrate it. And certainly if they don't know the difference between soul and spirit, how to meet their spirit and then operate from that space and integrate it. So there I go, 25% of your time. And it's not just about integrating, it's about actually nurturing each part of ourselves, so that from trigger to response, it's different. And at the bottom, if you can see on the screen, when we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. And in the moment that we have judgment, therein lies the opportunity and the gift in that trigger to be able to go deeper and bring about a different reality. So, as I've just said, when we operate from the lower levels of self in our responses, body, mind, and soul, when we're triggered, all too often we choose a shame, guilt, or blame story to justify our way to be in the world. I catch myself still doing it every day, Mark. And every time I do it, and I feel the pain of my judgment, and I allow myself to say, gee, Jacqui, this is what you did, then I can come back and realize that I have available to me the space to be connected to my spirit, integrate, go back to my balancing, remind myself where I'm not doing the work. And when we are integrated and balanced, we can see that our triggers are actually the message and an opportunity to grow. And it's very hard when you look at things like a war in Russia to see how that can teach us. But it really is there, and it is an opportunity for growth, as is and was COVID. So in order to manifest a different reality or the miracle of a changed thought, word, or deed, as I go back again, it's when we examine and unpack the quality and structure of the underlying belief. And, for me, there I was, this young girl of 16 who believed in physical miracle manifestation and fell over and got sick on all kinds of levels, and had to go back and go look at what was the quality and structure of my belief attached to the story that I was holding on to. And when we can look at that for ourselves, we can bring about this real change. So this depth of questioning, and as I said, beyond kindness or beyond being good, requires an immense amount of courage. And I also talk in my workshops about the difference between bravery, which is something you need to access when you're a warrior, but the courage is for a spiritual revolutionary, because you have to hold compassion for your mistakes, compassion for what you don't know. So courage is such a deep-rooted way of surrendering. So the courage to examine and change our beliefs into love-infused beliefs is the path of the spiritual revolutionary. Oh, don't know what happened there. Sorry. So many of us will know this, a lot of people who are involved in your organization or come to your talks understand this work, but it's hard for us to stay integrated and be integrated and to stay at one with spirit. And so the question is, why is this so hard? Because the ego is actually very sneaky and it's so tricky. And this is where I'm going to come back to my taxi story as to how it tripped me up again. And it tricks us from access, because I went from, oh, look how good I am, to the taxis disappeared. So it tricks us from staying balanced and integration. And I notice when I fall out of my practice, I immediately fall into bad behavior, and I own it as bad behavior and unkind behavior. So getting back to the disappearing taxis, there I was, and taxis were gone. I didn't see them anymore. So one day I'm driving along, and the next minute I see a taxi and he sort of waves me on. And I think, oh my goodness, look how nice this taxi driver is. And I didn't realize it had actually been a couple of years that I hadn't actually seen a taxi. Now the taxi was back. There it was, and disappearing. And I was, wow, what's going on? And it wasn't 10 minutes later, there was another taxi, and the taxi driver waved at me and he waved me on. And this then happened a few times. And I was like, hallelujah, I've manifested the miracle. These taxis are all just filled with love. And I couldn't wait to tell everyone. And I was bragging about it on a level that was just probably unpleasant for everyone to hear. I was in this massive evangelical phase. And as I was sort of sitting with this, celebrating and sharing this, it was about 2 weeks later, I still remember, it was 2 weeks before the Argus. And the next minute, the cyclist came out in front of me in Constantia, there near Peddlers, as he was crossing the road, and I cursed the cyclist. And then I went down the road and there was another cyclist. And the next minute, I was like, okay, you're so busy bragging about the taxis, because I was sort of taking on the voice of teacher in an arrogant way. And suddenly here I was, a student again with these damn bicycles. And I was like, why are there bicycles all over the place? Can the Argus just happen and I can be done with it? And of course I packed up laughing, and I realized that I needed to find that space to bring this message and it's taken me a long time, another 6 years, in terms of my own healing, in terms of my own understanding, in terms of my own work. And so I have manifested the taxis out of my life again, and cyclists. But that doesn't mean that every day there isn't a trigger, and I need to go back and I need to go deeper. And it's in that part where we remain student, in that depth of the work, the depth of the courage, that I'm finding my growth and learning, and even with very tricky situations like wars that are in the world at the moment. So there it was. There was my ego. Hoo, hoo, hoo. Look at me. I got taxis out of my life. And that's the thing, is the ego so sneaky, because it was also on the other side, remember, where I was going like an angel, when at first there was the space between me and the taxis, and look at what good person I was being. And I do believe that it's often the voice of our inner child. It's a bit brattish. But when we can put those babies to sleep and balance them and just teach from the heart of student and be at one with love, that we can actually be change. And it's in that I'm humbled every day. And I trust the voice of universal wisdom to teach and guide me. And it doesn't mean I don't have coaches and teachers. Mark, you are one of my all-time favorite spiritual healers, and I wish I could have more time with you. But I rely on people to guide me, friends, family, loved ones, as well as, light workers that are out there in the world. So when integrated and balanced, our ego is healthy. And from this space, we can access true curiosity and courage, and open to be love. Our future. When thinking, doing, and speaking from a fully integrated and balanced self, we can move and be in the world, as Gandhi said, a being of love in the world. We can manifest a different reality, as in the miracle, and self-heal from physical, mental, and emotional illnesses. Mark, I think I've shared this with you before, but once again, this is an image that was gifted to me from Universal Wisdom to share. It is available on my website if anybody wants to download it. But this is the work that I go through in terms of all of the different elements, whether it be from mystical teachings, self-teaching, theological, psychological, and theological, in terms of the understanding. And you can see on the outside of this, God, universal wisdom, spirit, consciousness are all synonyms, as well as love. This is something else that was gifted to me. And this is something that I say at the end of my meditation every day to help myself stay connected with spirit. And it was a prayer for love, where I ask for the wisdom, grace, and courage for my mind's thoughts to be filled with love for self and all others. And then I go and I ask for that same wisdom, grace, and courage for my soul's spoken words to be filled with love for self and all others. I ask for the same wisdom, grace, and courage for my body's feelings and actions to be filled with love for self and all others. I then ask for the wisdom, grace, and courage for the spirit of my being to fuse all of my beliefs with love, so that my thoughts, words, and deeds can manifest the miracle of love. And I always bow out as student and teacher of love within me to honor each and every individual that touches my life, that all has love within them.